Victoria Prentis, just want to talk about what's happening in Kiev to start with. You've been, haven't you? And
yes,
you also support Kiev refugees who are here.
Yes, I was there almost exactly a year ago. It was the most beautiful city. Well, I'm sure it still is. And it's just awful to hear the news this morning. We've got a young woman who lives with us, who's been with us since March, and she lives in Kiev normally and has the air raid siren on her telephone, which goes off in our house in my constituency in Banbury, and it's really chilling to hear the news today, actually.
And I thought for those that are in Kiev at the moment.
Yes, and Zaporizhia overnight was attacked again. It is still, we are still in the absolute midst of war. And we've heard some dreadful stories over the weekend. Her grandparents are living in their cellar in Kherson. They come up in the daytime, but they sleep in the cellar. And they don't actually know whether they voted or not in the recent referendum. A Russian soldier with a gun came to the door and they filled in papers, but what they meant, they don't know. And it's quite salutary, I think, for us to remember what is actually happening at the moment.
How appropriate was it, do you think, for the destruction of the bridge that connects Crimea and Russia, because he was always going to react to that?
Well, I don't think the Ukrainians have taken responsibility for that destruction, so we have to be very careful, I think. We don't know who was responsible for it. In the Ukrainian mind, that bridge was quite an aggressive act in itself because it linked Crimea to Russia. So the Ukrainians, or certainly the ones who we know, don't like that bridge. But I don't think we know who was responsible for blowing it up.
And he is speaking to his security team this morning, President Putin. He has threatened on more than one occasion the prospect of a nuclear attack. What would you say to him?
Well, I think this is a really worrying time for globally, really. I'm sure that we in this country have done the right thing by the Ukrainians, both by taking them in, but also, very importantly, by supporting them militarily. It's absolutely right that we should continue to stand with the Ukrainians against this Russian aggression, and I really hope that we can de-escalate.
One of the byproducts of the war in Ukraine, of course, is the energy supply, both to Europe and indeed to the UK as well. It's causing all sorts of problems for people here in the United Kingdom going forward, especially going into the winter. Why isn't the government offering an advice campaign, an ad campaign to tell us what to do to try to save energy?
Well, it's something that we're thinking about, but at the moment we don't think we need to spend a lot of public money on a campaign like that. The reason for that is really that we are very lucky, particularly when you look at other places in Europe which don't have the security of energy supply that we have. We're only about 20% reliant on the imports of gas in this country. So we're fairly secure. The National Grid, who advise on this, have said that we have a buffer, and we're pretty certain that we will have enough energy to go through the winter. I mean, certainly the environmentalist in me says, for goodness sake, turn the lights off when you leave a room and use energy very carefully. Of course I do, and that's the way I've brought my children up to behave, and that's the way that I would hope people could be. But I don't think we need to frighten people, and what I'm really worried about is that older people and vulnerable people do need to put the heating on and need to feel able to do that. So we have to get the balance right with the messaging.
Yeah, pretty certain isn't definite, though, is it? I mean,
well, I think in this world very little is definite, but the National Grid has said that we're fairly secure, we have a buffer, and it's very unlikely, to use their words, that we won't have enough electricity this winter. But of course, if you're out and about and you're not at home, then of course turn the heating down or off.
Some people can't afford to put it on in the first place. But if we're not concerned about it unnecessarily, then why are you advising people not to use as much electricity?
Well, that's only from an environmental point of view rather than a security one. The government is pretty confident that we have enough energy to get us through this winter. We're feeling quite fortunate compared with some of our European friends in that regard. And if we need to give more messaging later on in the winter, then we'll do that. But at the moment, what is important is that we help people to understand that there is enough energy. They should use it if they need it. And if they're old or vulnerable and sitting at home, then they should put the heating on. Of course they should.
Nadeem Zahawi, who describes himself as the Chief Operating Officer for the government, was on the TV yesterday saying we should go to the government website to look for advice. I went and I filled it. Actually, it's not straightforward. I filled in quite a lot of questions. And the outcome was that I needed to buy a £35,000 heat pump.
Was it?
Yes.
Was this an attempt to get you to be more environmental in
I
your
have no
energy
idea, but that's what it was suggesting that I should do in order to try to save energy. But there you go. £12,000 to £37,000 depending on the ground source, and went further into it, and it said about 35 grand for my heat pump.
Well, clearly that's not an option that's available to everybody.
No,
I mean, it may be, I don't know how you answer the questions or what sort of house you live in, but we do need to look at new ways and new renewables to heat our properties. I don't have a heat pump. I'm still on oil, I'm afraid. So I think at home we will be a bit more sparing. We will be a bit more mindful, but I've tried for years to get the children to be more mindful about the energy they use, if I'm honest.
A lot of people are on benefits and would not be able to afford that sort of money, or indeed to put their heating on at all over the winter period. And yet the Prime Minister is looking at, or being told, not increasing benefits by the rate of inflation. I'm guessing you would implore her to think again on that.
Well, no decision has been taken about the uprating of benefits. This is, it's quite a long and process-driven decision-making. And if I could just explain it to you. So tomorrow we'll get the September figures. I know it's October, but they come out tomorrow on earnings. Next week we'll get the figures on inflation. And then the Secretary of State, my Secretary of State at the Department of Work and Pensions, has a statutory duty to consider those figures. She can't do anything until those figures have come. And she will then consider how to, if at all, uprate benefits and what figure to choose. She has a very wide discretion to do that. We make a decision and we communicate it usually by the end of November, and then I will take through a piece of legislation in the House of Commons, which happens every year in January, and then benefits will be uprated or not, or in accordance with whatever method is chosen in April.
But if we know, which we do according to research that's been done, if we don't increase it by inflation benefits, 450,000 more people will go into absolute poverty.
I think
it's a no-brainer.
I think it's really important that we have all the statistics and all the figures about poverty as well at our disposal before we make this critically important decision. It's obviously a really worrying time for people on benefits because they know that inflation is rising, and they want us to make this decision as soon as we possibly can so that they have the security of knowing how their benefits will be next year. I get that completely, but I can't possibly make the decision and on my own now. We need to get the figures, get everything at our disposal, and then I will make sure that we make that decision as quickly as possible this year.
Okay, but it's going to cost £5 billion if you go with inflation. How will you pay for that?
I think the difference between the two figures, it's wages or inflation, is about half of that, in fact. But obviously it depends on what those figures are, but we'll know a lot more next week. I think it is really important that we make sure that we target the government resources at the most vulnerable this winter.
Okay, talk to me about the SNP, if you would. It's their conference at the moment in Aberdeen. Nicola Sturgeon says she detests everything the Tories stand for. How do you feel about her?
Well, I don't think that's great language to use. And actually, frankly, when you look at the global situation we're in and the war that we were just talking about, I really think it's quite important that we're able politely to disagree with each other in this country. We are so fortunate. We can have a democratic system, so much that we take for granted, and we ought to be able to have sensible discussion about policy without detesting each other. There's no need.
Okay, politics of the playground?
Well, it's just not how we do things, I don't think.
Talk to me about some suggestions in the newspapers this morning that I'm reading that Tom Watson should be given a peerage. That was knocked back a couple of years ago, but Sir Keir Starmer is looking again at Tom Watson getting a peerage. What do you think?
Well, it's a matter for the Labour Party who they put forward for peerages.
But is it distasteful, given what?
Well, I've never
previously?
really. I'm not the world expert on that story. I know that there was.
Well, let me tell you. He had been accused, or he is now being accused of insulting the victims of false sex abuse allegations. Lady Britain, as in Lord Britain's
wife.
Yeah, his widow branded Mr. Watson despicable and offensive. As you know, he was falsely accused of rape and child abuse as a result of this campaign that had been conducted at the time. Harvey Proctor falsely accused of being a child murderer by this fantasist as well, supported by Tom Watson. Should he get a peerage?
Well, my difficulty is, Kate, is that I don't know what Tom Watson believed. I don't know. I really can't advocate for him in any way. He was clearly taken in by somebody who was making up very unpleasant and malicious stories about prominent men at the time. What Tom Watson believed at any one time, I really can't.
So it wasn't something that you would say.
Well, I think it's very important that anybody who gets a peerage should be very carefully investigated. And I do think, to go to your earlier point, that it is quite important that we're very careful in public life about who we accuse of what.
So everybody should be thoroughly investigated before they get a peerage. What about Conor Burns?
I don't think there's any suggestion that Conor Burns is getting a peerage at the moment.
Yeah, there is. Apparently his name is on the list that the former Prime Minister has put forward.
Well, I hadn't heard that.
What do you think? Should he get one?
I think where we are, what's happened, I don't know any more about that. Well, I probably know less about the facts of the incident than you do. I think what's important is that the Chief Whip has been asked to investigate this. I think that she must do that as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. It's a really difficult situation for all involved, not least the accuser, the victim, the alleged victim, if you like. And I think it's really important that we solve this particular problem as quickly as we can.
Before he gets a knighthood.
What is impressive is that the Prime Minister took very swift action.
She did.
To make sure that Conor was removed from office while the matter is investigated. But I think from his point of view, as well as anybody else involved, we just need to get on with working out what happened.
The young Ukrainian girl that lives with you, what's her name?
Vika.
Okay, well, we hope
Another
she's
Victoria.
Okay. Yeah, we hope she's okay, and we hope that the family are as well.
It's a great privilege having her to stay, actually. But we do feel the war is very close.
We must let you go. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Ms. Preston. Thank you.